She protected Keanu Reeves for 12 years, then vanished overnight, leaving behind a sealed letter and a warning he never saw coming. What secret was so dangerous it made his most loyal bodyguard walk away from everything? And what happens when the truth she uncovered threatens more than just his reputation? Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. The sky over Los Angeles was still dark when Riley Torres stepped out of her car and quietly locked the door behind her. The air was cool, damp with the kind of stillness that only exists before dawn. She looked up at the house she had entered thousands of times before, but this time would be different. This time, she wouldn't be coming back. Her steps were soft as she approached the front door. She didn't knock. She didn't need to. Keanu had always given her the access code in case of emergencies. This one just happened to be of a different kind. The keypad chirped once as the door clicked open. The familiar scent inside hit her immediately. Coffee grounds, aged wood, and the faint trace of whatever natural incense Keanu liked to burn when he was writing. Riley took off her shoes, just as he always insisted everyone do, and moved quietly across the living room. The baby grand piano near the window gleamed under a shaft of moonlight. She crossed to it and laid a white envelope gently on top. It was thick, heavy, with the words she had never been able to say in person. Keanu was written in block letters across the front. Clear, clean, and firm. Beside the letter, she placed her silver badge, its once sharp edges smoothed from 12 years of use. And next to that, a small black USB drive. It looked unremarkable, but its contents held the weight of everything she had learned, everything she could no longer keep quiet about. She stood there for a moment, taking in the stillness of the room, the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, the worn throw blanket draped over the couch where she had sat during so many long nights, waiting for him to come home from events. Her eyes drifted to the framed photo near the bookshelf, Keanu and his stunt team after the last John Wick shoot. She was just outside the frame, as always, watching from the edge. Her mind flashed back to one of the earliest nights on the job, a movie premiere in Hollywood, flashing lights, screaming fans, chaos wrapped in glamour. And then, a man in the crowd pushing forward, something glinting in his jacket. She had moved before anyone else even saw. Her grip locked on his arm, a taser pressed to his ribs, all in one motion. Security swarmed after her, but it was already over. The knife never made it out of his coat. Later that night, Keanu had offered her a coffee, then said simply, "Thank you for seeing it before I did." That had been her job ever since, to see what others didn't, to protect him not just from danger, but from the weight of the world pressing too hard, too fast. But now, she had seen something else, something she couldn't ignore. Riley walked slowly through the hallway, her fingertips brushing the familiar edges of the home she had helped secure for over a decade. Every corner held memories. A soft laugh from a night spent reviewing floor plans. Keanu sitting on the stairs tying his boots before a charity motorcycle ride. The time his dog refused to let her into the study unless bribed with peanut butter. It was more than a job. It had always been more. She paused by the kitchen. A note on the counter in Keanu's handwriting listed groceries: bananas, oat milk, dog treats, coffee filters. It was the kind of quiet list that said everything about the man she'd spent 12 years protecting. Thoughtful, unassuming, predictable in the best ways. And that made what she was doing now all the harder. The truth had arrived slowly, like a fog creeping through everything. At first, she thought it was just stress, a few discrepancies in schedules, an unusual directive passed through a second-hand source. But then came the night she intercepted a package meant for Keanu. One that contained documents misrouted from a production assistant. It was labeled innocently enough, budget drafts. But inside were references to a project with military subcontracts, biometric behavioral testing, and phrases she'd only ever heard whispered in private briefings. The more she looked, the more she found. Not about Keanu himself, never directly, but about people around him. Quiet hires, unexplained labs, consultants whose backgrounds were too redacted to trust. When she tried to ask questions, the answers were vague. Standard security upgrades, they told her. Nothing to worry about. But she knew better. It wasn't one thing, it was all of it. She made her way back to the living room and stopped at the piano again. The letter, the badge, the drive. It was everything she could leave behind without a confrontation. Confrontations wouldn't work with Keanu. He wouldn't yell. He wouldn't argue. He would look at her with those searching eyes that saw past armor and pride. And she would fold. That's why she couldn't stay to explain. She remembered the time he found her in tears after a breakup she hadn't even told him about. He had walked into the room, sat beside her, and just stayed. No questions, no advice, just presence. She'd guarded him with her life every day since. Now she was guarding something else. The line between loyalty and silence. And she had chosen. Outside, the early light of dawn began to creep across the sky. The house behind her remained still, peaceful. Keanu wouldn't be up for another hour, maybe more. She wanted him to read the letter in private, to sit with it, to know this wasn't abandonment. It was something more painful. Riley opened the front door one last time, stepped out onto the porch, and closed it softly behind her. The sun was just starting to rise, and with it, the end of everything she had known. Riley stepped off the porch and into the quiet street, her footsteps soft on the pavement, still damp from overnight sprinklers. She didn't turn back. She couldn't. Every instinct in her body wanted to scan the perimeter one last time, to make sure the cameras were functioning, to double-check the front lock. But this time, she let it go. Let it all go. The city was just beginning to stir. Lights blinked on in apartment windows. A jogger passed with headphones in, nodding politely. Cars rolled quietly through intersections. The world was moving forward, unaware that something vital had just ended. She walked to her car, an unremarkable silver sedan parked 2 blocks away, just as planned. She had wiped it clean the night before. No digital trail, no security credentials, everything left behind. Her phone was gone too, replaced with a burner device that held only 2 numbers, one to her lawyer, the other to the investigative reporter waiting for her across the country. As she slid into the driver's seat, the finality of it all settled over her. 12 years, holidays missed, relationships sacrificed, nights spent pacing hotel hallways while Keanu slept inside. It hadn't just been a job. It had been a mission. And for the longest time, she had believed in the cause. Because she believed in him. But belief couldn't erase what she had discovered. She had tried to make sense of it, tried to convince herself there was some explanation. Maybe he didn't know. Maybe it was someone else pulling the strings. But the deeper she dug, the harder it became to deny. The data, the signatures, the authorization codes, his name was there. Not always directly, not with a flourish, but enough. She started the car and pulled away slowly. Every street she turned down, every intersection she passed felt like a line crossed. She had written him everything, what she knew, what she suspected, and why she had to leave. Her final words had been the hardest to write. I protected your life, Keanu. Now I'm protecting what's left of mine. Somewhere inside, she hoped he would understand. Maybe not today, maybe not even this year, but someday. She had seen the best of him, his compassion, his fierce loyalty, the way he always looked people in the eye when they spoke. That man still existed. She just didn't know where he stood anymore. As she merged onto the freeway, the Los Angeles skyline faded behind her. She didn't cry. Not yet. The road stretched ahead, long and uncertain. But she had made her choice. And in that silence, with the sun rising in her rearview mirror, Riley knew this was the only way forward. The first time Riley met Keanu Reeves, she was wearing the only suit she owned, standing outside a quiet backlot trailer in Burbank. She wasn't nervous. Not after 2 tours overseas and 3 years in private security. But this job was different. This wasn't just asset protection. This was Keanu Reeves, Hollywood icon, global presence, and, as she would soon discover, a man who valued quiet more than spotlight. She'd been recommended by Marcus Tran, a stunt coordinator Keanu had worked with on multiple films. Marcus vouched for her integrity, discipline, and ability to blend in, exactly what Keanu was looking for. Not flashy muscle, not a wall of intimidation, just someone who could watch without being watched, and act when no one else did. Keanu met her without ceremony. He stepped out of his trailer in jeans and a t-shirt, no entourage, no assistant. "You're Riley?" he asked, glancing at the resume in his hand. She nodded. "Ex-military. Afghanistan twice?" She nodded again. "You okay with being invisible?" he added. "I prefer it," she said. That was it. No handshake, no welcome speech, just a nod. "We'll try it for a few weeks. Let's see how it feels." What followed was 12 years of vigilance in the shadows. At first, Riley kept her distance. She observed his rhythm. Early morning drives, late-night piano sessions, long silences between interviews. He was disciplined but unpredictable. 1 week on set, the next visiting a children's hospital unannounced. Her job was to predict the unpredictable and quickly, quietly, learn the soft spots in his armor. She learned the way he tapped his coffee mug twice when deep in thought, the way he smiled wider for kids than for cameras, the way he flinched, almost imperceptibly, when asked about his past. She earned his trust slowly, in unspoken moments. One night in Toronto, during a charity gala for cancer research, things went wrong. Protesters had infiltrated the event, angry over a rumored donor list. Keanu had just finished speaking when someone surged toward him from the crowd, yelling about corporate hypocrisy. Security hesitated. Riley didn't. She moved fast, intercepting the protester before he got close. She didn't tackle him. She just stood between them, calm, firm, hands raised. "He's not your enemy," she said quietly, diffusing the tension with a stillness that stunned even the protester. The crowd settled. The moment passed. Later that night, Keanu knocked on her hotel door. "Thanks," he said. That was it. Just thanks. But he looked her in the eye a little longer than usual. That was the night their bond truly began. The real turning point came a year later, when Riley's mother passed away unexpectedly. She got the call just after a press event in New York. Her expression didn't change much, but Keanu noticed. Always did. She had tucked her phone away and returned to her position near the exit. Business as usual. An hour later, as they entered the SUV to leave, Keanu asked quietly, "Is your mother okay?" Riley paused. "She passed, this morning." There was a long silence. Keanu's driver glanced in the rearview mirror, unsure what to do. Riley stared straight ahead. Keanu leaned forward. "You're flying out tonight?" She blinked. "It's fine. I already arranged coverage. I'll go after this week's filming." "No," Keanu said, firmer than she had ever heard. "You're going tonight. I'll handle coverage. I'll cover the cost. Go be with your family." She didn't know what to say. She hadn't cried since the call. But that moment nearly broke her. "I don't need charity," she said, half-whisper. "It's not charity," Keanu replied. "It's care. You've earned that." That night, he booked her a first-class ticket back to Illinois, sent flowers to the funeral home with no signature. The next day, she got a message from his assistant. "Take the time you need," he said, not to rush back. Riley returned a week later, and nothing was said. But from that point on, something had shifted. She wasn't just another security detail anymore. She was part of his circle, the quiet, invisible circle that kept him human. Over the years, they shared hundreds of unspoken exchanges. In green rooms and back entrances, airport hangars and backstage corridors. He never asked about her military past, but once she caught him glancing at the scar on her left wrist when she rolled up her sleeves. He said nothing, just passed her a glass of water, the way you do when someone's memory turns sharp. There were moments that deepened the trust, like when she found a threatening letter tucked under Keanu's windshield after a film premiere. He hadn't seen it, she did. She scanned it, logged it, and neutralized the source within 48 hours. He never asked what happened to the sender. He just said, "You're always 5 seconds ahead of the storm." They rarely spoke for more than a few minutes at a time, but she knew his tells. The way his jaw set before bad news. The way he'd offer a sandwich to someone who looked like they hadn't eaten. The way he carried sorrow like breath. Constant and quiet. For 12 years, Riley remained just out of frame, always there but never seen. And Keanu trusted her with his life. Her job wasn't just to protect him from threats. It was to preserve the fragile ecosystem that allowed him to live in a world that didn't always make sense. She handled pushy photographers, scouted hotel exits, checked soundstage lighting for vulnerabilities, and once even diffused a situation with an obsessive fan at a book signing, without raising her voice or drawing attention. Riley's strength wasn't in force, it was in foresight. But it was more than professional discipline that kept her in the shadows for over a decade. It was belief. She believed in the man she was guarding, not the actor, not the celebrity, the human being. He paid his crew overtime out of pocket. He once stood in the rain for an hour talking to a disabled veteran who couldn't get to the event tent. He memorized the names of every security team member. He carried sorrow with dignity and joy without arrogance. The longer she stood beside him, the more she realized something rare. He wasn't pretending. This wasn't a brand. It was just who he was. There was a night in Paris, a private event for an arts foundation, where Riley had to physically escort a drunk board member away from Keanu after he made a crude joke about the women in one of Keanu's films. Keanu didn't flinch, didn't lash out. He just looked the man in the eye and said, "That's not who we are." Later, after the chaos died down, he slipped Riley a folded piece of paper. It was a quote scribbled in his own handwriting. "Guard your spirit, even when no one is watching." That stayed in her wallet for years. Over time, Riley became the constant no one noticed. She stopped correcting reporters who mistook her for an assistant. She stopped introducing herself to hotel staff. She learned to listen without appearing interested, to move without drawing eyes. People underestimated her, and that was her greatest advantage. But something had shifted over the past 18 months. Meetings became quieter. Keanu started taking private calls behind closed doors, calls he used to trust her to screen. He traveled without security once to a remote meeting with tech executives. When she asked why, he said gently, "I just needed a day to breathe." She didn't press, but it lingered. She started noticing documents locked away on drives she no longer had access to, mentions of a private partnership, something hush-hush, something buried under layers of non-disclosure agreements. And then came the letter, the one she found accidentally when reviewing the encryption protocols on his travel laptop. A draft, unsent, from someone named Claire, a scientist. It referenced a project Riley had never heard of, a project with consequences. That night, she didn't sleep. 12 years in the shadows had taught her one thing above all: When someone like Keanu starts keeping secrets, something bigger is brewing. And sometimes, the one who stands closest has the clearest view of the storm to come. It started with a message from Keanu that read simply, "Need you next week. Quiet thing. Government-backed. Just you and me. No details. No brief." That was typical. Riley had spent over a decade learning that when Keanu asked without explanation, it usually meant something he was still trying to understand himself. She booked their travel under an alias they used for discreet trips, Miles Bishop for him, Veronica Moore for her, and rerouted the return leg to remain flexible. The only clue came during a short exchange before their flight. "It's supposed to help veterans. Some new neural therapy project." She raised an eyebrow. "Medical?" He nodded. "Mind-body tech. Next gen." They landed outside Washington, D.C., and a black SUV picked them up. No logos, no plates. Riley asked the driver a basic security question. He didn't answer. She watched his knuckles tighten on the wheel. That was the first red flag. They arrived at the Evergreen Institute, a heavily wooded facility surrounded by 2 layers of fencing. The inner fence had razor wire. Riley took note. Civilian research centers didn't typically need tactical perimeter defense. At the gate, 2 men in military contractor uniforms checked her ID, longer than necessary, before waving them through. She caught one of them glancing at a clipboard and muttering something into his radio. Inside, the reception was minimal. No media, no fanfare. Just a brisk woman in a white coat who led them through a sterile hallway without introducing herself. Riley scanned the layout. High-end biometric locks, unmarked doors, too many corridors with mirrored glass. Every instinct told her this was more than it claimed to be. Keanu, though, remained calm, curious even. He nodded politely, asked sharp questions, smiled at the technicians. But when they entered a lab with a massive server wall and dozens of wires leading into a glassed-off room, Riley paused. There were cameras inside, too many for simple observation. In one corner, a technician quickly minimized a screen when she stepped near. She caught a glimpse of a human brain image, glowing red along the prefrontal cortex. Next to it, the words, "Command Integration." "What's that?" Riley asked. "Routine cognitive mapping," the woman said quickly, avoiding eye contact. Routine. But there was nothing routine about the fact that a man in fatigues with no visible badge was watching from the hallway. She made mental notes. The badge IDs didn't match the pre-cleared staff list she'd been given. 2 fire exits were marked on paper, but she saw at least 4 hidden RFID doors that weren't. She noticed a distinct hum of electricity behind one wall, where no lab should be. It wasn't just what they showed her, it was what they hid. Keanu remained gracious, but Riley's posture shifted. This wasn't a place for healing. This was a place that guarded secrets. And she hated secrets. The unease followed Riley into the following days. After returning to Los Angeles, Keanu seemed lighter, unaware of her rising doubts. He spoke about the possibilities of the project, how it might help paralyzed veterans regain independence or restore memory loss in trauma victims. He even mentioned sitting in on a simulation that showed a patient using only thought to move a prosthetic hand. Riley nodded, listened, but something inside her remained locked. She couldn't shake what she had seen in that mirrored hallway. The military presence, the coded doors, and most of all, the people who wouldn't meet her eyes. She began tracking their travel records, just in case. She kept her work notes digital, but disconnected from all cloud-based systems. Her military experience had taught her, if you were the only one documenting a shadow, you had to do it like you were already being watched. A few weeks later, she noticed something odd. A shipment labeled medical imaging equipment was rerouted 3 times before arriving at the Evergreen Institute. Riley found this curious. It was a brand she recognized from her time overseas, one used almost exclusively in battlefield surveillance. She dug deeper. The serial number had been registered to a military base in Nevada 6 months prior. When she searched again the next day, the listing had vanished. Keanu kept talking about the project with hope in his voice. "They say there's a girl who hasn't moved in years. She laughed during her last test," he told her one night. His eyes were glowing. "Can you imagine?" Riley nodded again, but the pit in her stomach grew heavier. If this was a medical facility, why was there no public registry? No press release? No mention in the scientific journals she regularly scanned for her personal curiosity? One night, she did what she'd never done before. She copied footage from a backup security server of their Evergreen visit. She isolated 2 frames from a hallway security camera. In the first, a patient in a hospital gown is walking unaided. In the second, 2 staff members are flanking him like he might fall, but his posture is perfectly upright. The timestamp showed the clip was from the same day Keanu toured the facility. But Riley knew what Keanu didn't. That particular wing had supposedly been off limits due to renovations. If someone had recovered, it was being hidden. And if they weren't recovered, the footage had been manipulated. She encrypted the clips and added them to a hidden folder. She labeled it simply anomalies. And with that act, Riley crossed a line in her own mind. She wasn't just Keanu's protector anymore. She was quietly becoming an investigator. And what she was uncovering was beginning to feel far bigger than either of them had realized. Riley knew she needed help but couldn't risk going through normal channels. Her loyalty to Keanu kept her from alerting law enforcement, and her training told her that drawing attention to a classified site could put people in danger, especially him. So she reached out to someone from her past, a woman named Jordan Lee, former Signals Intelligence with Army Cyber Command. Quiet, brilliant, owed Riley a favor from a mission in Kabul that neither of them ever talked about. Jordan didn't ask too many questions. She agreed to look into Evergreen's funding trail and get back to Riley within the week. In the meantime, Riley kept up appearances, driving Keanu to charity events, managing close protection at film shoots, watching for threats in crowds. Her body was there, but her mind was pulling threads from a web that seemed to have no center. The breakthrough came on a Tuesday. Jordan called from a secure line. "Your Evergreen Institute isn't clean," she said. "Their public funding records stop in 2020. But I traced a holding company that owns their land. It's tied to a defense contractor working on advanced neural enhancement. Think brain-to-machiner stuff." Riley felt her grip tighten on the phone. "Isn't he the guys to Keanu?" "No direct links. But I did find something strange. There's a shell corporation routing private donations into Evergreen. And guess who's listed as the largest donor?" Keanu's name. Riley didn't speak for several seconds. Harry climbed into his limousine. I'm sure he doesn't know." But now she wasn't so sure. How could he be so deeply involved and still so blind to the other layers? Later that night, Keanu mentioned the project again over dinner. "They're making real progress," he said, pouring her tea. "One of the scientists said this might let a veteran talk again, just by thinking. That's worth every dollar." She watched him closely. His tone was genuine, his hope was real. But she also noticed what he didn't say. He never asked for updates on the facility, never mentioned security clearances or medical oversight. It was like he had chosen to believe only the surface. That night, after Keanu had gone to bed, Riley sat alone in her apartment. She pulled out a notebook, the one she used only when something felt off. She wrote down 3 questions. Who's really behind Evergreen? What's happening on the lower levels? And why are they hiding it from the one man funding the whole thing? Then, in the corner of the page, she scribbled one word in bold block letters. Weapons? She closed the notebook and placed it beside her encrypted USB drive. Whatever Evergreen was doing, it was no longer just about hope. It was about control. And Riley knew, the more she uncovered, the more she put herself and Keanu at risk. Riley had never been one to keep journals. Her life had always been about movement, instinct, action. But after that day at the research compound, the sterile halls, the quiet avoidance in people's eyes, the layers of secrecy she was told not to question, something shifted inside her. She couldn't talk to anyone on the team. She couldn't raise the issue with Keanu. So she did the one thing she'd never done before. She wrote. The first entry was brief. Just the date, the time, the word classified circled twice, and a note about a name she'd overheard, Dr. Jensen. She didn't know then why it mattered, but it had felt off, and that feeling had always been her best compass. Over the next few days, the entries multiplied. She began tracking inconsistencies, delivery trucks arriving at odd hours, contractors without company logos, cameras she hadn't installed suddenly appearing around secured doors, and most of all, the feeling that she was no longer welcome where she had once moved freely. She hollowed out an old edition of To Kill a Mockingbird and slipped the notebook inside. The irony wasn't lost on her. Justice, truth, shadows, themes that now echoed through her own life. She labeled nothing. No one would find it easily unless they knew what to look for. The journals multiplied over the next year, one inside a fake oatmeal tin, another in a dusty shoebox marked winter gear. Each one held pieces of a puzzle she didn't yet know how to name. Keanu had changed too. That was what hurt the most. He used to debrief with her after events, lean on her instincts. There was a quiet rhythm to their communication, spoken and unspoken. But now he was closed off. He stopped letting her sweep meeting rooms. He began using the phrase, above your clearance. That cut deeper than she let on. Not because she wanted access for the sake of power, but because it meant he no longer trusted her fully, or worse, he was protecting her from something. She started writing about that too. His hands shaking after meetings, his smile a little too practiced. Once, after one of those late-night calls with a government official, he sat alone on the balcony for over an hour in the cold, just staring out into the Los Angeles skyline. She wrote that down, word for word, because if the day came when she had to act on her doubts, she would need more than memories. She would need the truth, written plainly as she had once vowed to protect him. The journals didn't just hold facts, they held questions, and Riley had more of them by the day. What exactly was being tested in those underground labs? Why were private contractors replacing the medical staff Keanu once proudly introduced to her? And why had the files she accessed months ago suddenly disappeared, even from her highest level clearance? She began cataloging not just the physical inconsistencies, but the emotional ones. Keanu was still kind, still soft-spoken, but something had hardened beneath that gentleness. He was working longer hours, taking more unscheduled trips, holding private conversations behind locked doors with names Riley wasn't even allowed to hear. And when she asked, just gently, just once, he smiled without meeting her eyes and said, "It's safer if you don't know." Safer. That word stayed with her. She wrote it on a page by itself. Every day after that, she checked her equipment twice, triple review security logs, asked her team subtle questions about who was visiting and when. Most of them didn't know. Tyler, the youngest, once told her, "Some of these people aren't even in the system. No clearance, no ID trail. It's like they don't exist." That went into the notebook too. One night, Riley followed a hunch. A late delivery had arrived at one of Keanu's private warehouses, a place she'd secured dozens of times. But this time, her clearance was rejected. Denied. When she pressed the biometric pad again, it locked her out completely. She stood in the dark, hearing the mechanical gate close behind her, and for the first time in years, she felt truly expendable. Back home, she opened one of the hidden notebooks and added a final entry for the night. "He's locking me out. Something's shifted, and whatever he's building, it's not what he said it was." She paused, stared at the words, then underlined them twice. That was the night she bought the encrypted USB drive. She copied only what she could verify: logs, access schedules, floor plans she had once helped design but now seemed rewritten. She didn't want to destroy anything. She didn't even want to accuse him. She just wanted to know the truth. And if the truth was dangerous, she wanted to protect him from it. Even if that meant walking away. But something deeper was cracking inside her, the realization that she could no longer separate her loyalty to Keanu from the growing fear that something irreversible was happening. She wasn't just guarding a man anymore. She was guarding a secret that could cost lives. The next morning, she didn't sleep. She reread every journal page from the past 3 years and copied them into one final, organized file. She didn't know when she'd need it, but she knew now, without a doubt, that the day was coming. Riley began waking in the middle of the night, heart racing, as if her body already knew what her mind refused to admit. Something was wrong, not just with the project, with the man she had stood behind for 12 years. Keanu was changing. Or maybe, she feared, she had never truly known what he was capable of when the stakes rose high enough. There had been one night, late, quiet, when she'd caught a glimpse of a document left open on a private screen. She hadn't meant to see it. It was a flash no more than a second before the screen locked, but the heading stuck with her. Neural Influence Field Protocol, and underneath it, a line that chilled her. Civilian Tolerance Thresholds Pending Review. That night, she didn't write in her journal. She sat in the dark of her apartment, the city humming outside, and simply stared at the USB drive she had begun to keep on her person at all times. What she'd gathered wasn't proof of wrongdoing, but it was enough to haunt her. Enough to make her question everything she thought she knew about the man she'd protected from death threats, stalkers, obsessed fans, and political extremists. Her loyalty hadn't been contractual, it had been personal, and that made everything more painful. The next morning, Keanu called her into his office. She had expected to be dismissed, maybe even confronted about her questions, her surveillance, her cautious distance, but instead he simply said, "Thank you for everything, Riley. I trust you more than anyone." Then he handed her a ticket to a wellness retreat in the mountains. "You've been running hard. You deserve a few days to breathe." She took the ticket with a smile, but something in her cracked. Later that night, she wrote only one line in the journal. "He knows I'm close, or maybe he's trying to make me stop looking." She didn't go to the retreat. She said she needed to monitor a warehouse delivery. But she spent the time organizing her files, scanning every journal page, and preparing for the day she knew was coming. She didn't want to be a whistleblower. She wanted to be wrong. She prayed to be wrong. But when Tyler told her, in a whisper outside HQ, that some of the files they'd logged were missing from the archives, and worse, that a janitor had been transferred after asking too many questions about the lower lab floors, Riley knew the wall between protection and deception had finally shattered. By the end of that week, she made her choice. She would write the letter, not to expose Keanu, not to destroy him, but to finally speak what had been clawing at her for 3 long years. She opened her journal one last time and underlined a sentence from months ago. "You cannot protect what you no longer understand." Then she closed the cover, picked up the USB, and began to write her goodbye. Riley crouched in the hallway, just beyond the secure door of the off-grid testing wing. She hadn't meant to be there, not for long anyway. She was only supposed to do a sweep, double-checking air circulation lines and blind spots like she always did. But that day, something had pulled her closer. a tension in the air, the kind her instincts had learned never to ignore. She paused beside a familiar maintenance vent. The metal was cool against her cheek. Voices filtered through in a steady murmur, too low to make out, until suddenly, one voice sharpened. The cognitive injection can be reversed, unless the interface burns in. Riley stiffened. The voice wasn't familiar, but the tone was unmistakably urgent. A pause. Then came another voice, deeper, calm. Keanu's. No one's being forced. There was silence. A long, uncomfortable pause that stretched far too long. You think that matters? The first voice hissed again. They were promised hope, not neural compliance. Riley's hand gripped the edge of the vent. Her stomach twisted. Neural compliance? You showed them videos of paraplegic patients moving robotic arms, typing with their minds. But what you didn't say was that their thoughts would no longer be fully their own. This tech could restore entire lives, Keanu replied. His voice had that steady conviction she knew too well. Isn't that worth the risk? A third voice joined, quieter, uncertain. But the subjects didn't give true informed consent, not about the permanence. The first voice again, not about the burn-in. The term repeated like an alarm in Riley's mind. She'd read mentions of it once, buried in a digital draft labeled Unstable Protocol Retention during one of her off-the-record scans. It was the stage when the neural interface locked into brain tissue, no longer removable without damage. Burn-in meant finality. It meant irreversible changes. She backed away from the vent as quietly as possible, her thoughts racing. It wasn't the first odd thing she'd overheard, but this was different. It wasn't an ethics debate. It sounded like a warning, a confrontation. And Keanu, he wasn't denying the facts. He was trying to justify them. By the time she returned to her room, her hands were trembling. She sat on the edge of the mattress and opened her encrypted journal. She documented every word she could remember, every pause, every inflection. She added it to the growing log, dozens of pages, written across 3 devices and 2 locked notebooks. Then she stared at her own handwriting for a long time. Was he losing sight of the line? Or had she just never noticed how close they'd always been to it? Riley couldn't sleep that night. She kept replaying the conversation over and over in her head, isolating each word, each shift in tone, trying to convince herself she'd misheard. Maybe she'd misunderstood what they meant by burn-in. Maybe neural compliance wasn't what it sounded like. But the voices hadn't been theoretical. They had been tense, afraid. And Keanu's had been calm, too calm. For years, Riley had watched him reject praise, fame, and even profits in the name of integrity. He gave away millions quietly, helped strangers when no one was watching, and always asked permission before entering someone's space. That man didn't lie. He didn't coerce. And yet, he had said it himself. No one's being forced. As if force wasn't the only kind of pressure that existed. She tried to shake it off the next day. Back on duty, dressed in black, earpiece in, scanning perimeters like nothing had changed. Keanu barely spoke to her, engrossed in a virtual meeting with 2 men whose credentials she couldn't verify. She asked if she should sweep the call room. He waved her off, distracted. No need, Riles, they're friends. Friends. That word had always felt sacred coming from him. But that day, it sounded rehearsed. Later, during a break, she asked about the project, casually, like she wasn't holding a 1,000-pound secret behind her ribs. So this thing in Nevada, it's still about vets, right? He looked up from his tablet. Of course. His answer was quick, too quick. She tried to smile. Nothing new I should know about? He hesitated for a fraction of a second. Then, just more tests, still early stages. Trust me, Riley, we're trying to change lives. He said it like a man holding something back, not because he wanted to lie, but because he was afraid she wouldn't understand the truth. And that was what finally cracked something in her. She had spent 12 years protecting this man. She had shielded him from threats that never made the news, taken bruises for him in crowds, missed her mother's funeral because he had a speaking engagement in Tokyo. Not once had she asked for more than honesty in return. But now, when it mattered most, he was giving her slogans instead of answers. That night, she pulled one of her hollowed-out books from the safe in her closet and added a new entry. Her handwriting shook, but her words were sharp. He doesn't see it yet, but he's standing on a fault line, and he's about to take the next step. Days turned into weeks. Riley continued her duties without missing a step, but inside, she was unraveling in silence. Her journal entries became longer, tighter, more analytical. She began keeping a second record, this time digital, encrypted on a separate USB that never left her person. She tracked everything: names of visitors, serial numbers of delivery crates, timelines between meetings and off-the-books flights. There were too many things that didn't fit. Too many staff who avoided eye contact. Too many "don't worry about it" from men who should have known better. But what haunted her most were the people she didn't see, the supposed volunteers. One night, Riley stayed late under the pretense of running comms tests at the Nevada site. Keanu was off-site, attending a foundation event in San Francisco. She timed it perfectly. In the south wing, she accessed the surveillance control room. Her clearance still worked. There were 4 camera feeds labeled only by letters: A, B, C, and D. Feed C caught her eye. It showed a narrow room, medical white and soundless. A young woman sat in a chair, head shaved, arms strapped gently but firmly to the rests. A red dot blinked behind her ear. Her eyes were open, but they weren't tracking. A technician walked in and said, "Pulse spike, run soft lock down." Riley froze. She stepped away from the console, breath shallow. She hadn't seen violence, not directly, but what she had seen was worse. Consent blurred into compliance, procedure twisted into control. She left the room silently, unnoticed. That night she went home and updated her journal. "Today I saw proof. This isn't about helping. It's about owning what's inside someone's mind." And yet, in her gut, she still didn't think Keanu knew the full scope. Not really. He was many things: brilliant, reclusive, sometimes impulsive. But he had never been cruel, which made it all the more terrifying. Because if he could be swept into this, what did that mean about everyone else? A week later, the final straw came. She was scheduled to accompany Keanu to a press-free tour of a new expansion facility. But when she arrived, his assistant intercepted her. "You won't be needed today," the assistant said, avoiding her eyes. "Why not?" Riley asked, already knowing. "Dr. Isaacs has security covered." Riley's jaw tensed. Dr. Isaacs was military. She'd seen his name on one of the internal memos. Experimental psychological conditioning. That night, she didn't write in her journal. She stared at her reflection for hours, memorizing the woman who had stood between the world and Keanu for 12 years. By dawn, she had made her decision. The next entry would be her last. The Nevada sun was harsh, glaring down on a compound that barely broke the horizon. From the sky, it looked like little more than a research outpost tucked against the dry hills. But Riley knew better. She had visited Ghostline more than a dozen times. This time, everything felt different. They arrived by private jet, Keanu silent for most of the flight. He only spoke once to say, "It's a short review trip. Shouldn't take long." Riley didn't press. She was already on edge. She'd checked the flight manifest. The only other passenger was a man listed as L. Dunn, but no one greeted him on arrival. He disappeared into a separate transport without even acknowledging them. The facility's front gate still bore the official signage: Neural Research Initiative, Satellite Site. But a new metal security layer had been added over the original glass entrance, and Riley had to scan her ID twice before it registered. Even the air smelled different. More sterile, chemically scrubbed. There were no familiar faces at check-in. Inside, they were met by a stone-faced technician in black, who nodded to Keanu and then looked at Riley. "You'll wait at Station 2. Riley blinked. "I usually clear the level before he enters." "Not this time. Level 3 protocol." Keanu looked at her but didn't speak. Riley held his gaze for a beat longer than usual, searching for something, anything, that told her this was still the man she had protected all these years. But his face had already turned away, following the technician into the elevator. Station 2 was a small monitoring room with tinted glass and outdated consoles. It smelled like dust and old electronics. She sat for 20 minutes, unmoving, eyes locked on the hallway. That's when a young technician passed by, eyes red, shoulders tense. He didn't see her at first. She stood as he reached for a coffee pod. "Rough day?" she asked quietly. The man flinched. "Didn't know this room was in use." "Is it always like this?" she asked, watching him closely. The technician hesitated, then said under his breath, "They didn't even know they'd signed up for this." Riley's stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" But he was already walking out, muttering, "Nothing. I shouldn't have said anything." She sat back down slowly, pulse ticking louder than the humming console behind her. That one sentence hit harder than any encrypted file she had read. They didn't even know they'd signed up for this. Something was deeply wrong inside Ghostline, and for the first time, Riley wasn't sure she could pretend otherwise. The hallway outside Station 2 remained quiet, but Riley's instincts wouldn't let her relax. Her hand hovered near the door controls, the technician's words echoing through her mind. She didn't move until she heard the faint whir of the elevator descending again. Keanu returned alone. His face was calm, composed, but his eyes had a glassy intensity Riley hadn't seen before. He didn't speak until the car doors sealed them inside. "Sorry for the wait," he said. "We had a lot to go over." "What's going on down there, Keanu?" He turned to look at her, surprised. "Just research, same as always." "Then why wasn't I cleared to secure the room?" A pause. His fingers flexed briefly, then relaxed. "Some parts of this project are under classified agreements. Even you don't have clearance." Riley tried to steady her voice. "You always made me part of the loop. Always. Even if just to keep the perimeter safe." "I know," he said softly. "And I appreciate that more than you realize. But not enough to tell me what you're really doing?" Keanu's silence was answer enough. He looked away, toward the descending lights flickering along the elevator shaft. When they stepped outside into the burning sun, Riley's jaw was tight, but her expression stayed neutral. She knew the security cameras would be watching. She said nothing until they reached the SUV. As she opened her door, Keanu hesitated beside her. "Do you trust me?" he asked. She looked at him. "I did." The ride back to the airstrip was quiet. Riley kept her eyes on the road, while Keanu checked messages on his phone. He wasn't hiding it, he rarely did. But he was still keeping her in the dark, and that was new. As they boarded the jet, the pilot nodded and gestured them to take off early. No briefing, no paperwork, just lift and go. Once they were in the air, Keanu leaned back in his seat, closing his eyes. Riley watched the clouds roll past the window. Ghostline was far below now, buried under layers of dirt, concrete, and secrets. She had protected Keanu Reeves for 12 years, knew every one of his habits. When he skipped breakfast, when he was too tired to drive, when he couldn't remember the last time he'd spoken to someone outside a movie set. But she didn't know who he was becoming. That was the danger. She turned her head slightly, pretending to rest, but her thoughts burned with questions. Who were the subjects? What had they really signed up for? Why did Keanu suddenly need more secrecy than she had ever seen? By the time they touched down in Los Angeles, Riley had made a decision. She was going to find out what was buried under level 3, even if it meant walking away from everything. 2 nights after returning from Nevada, Riley drove out to a bluff overlooking the Pacific. It was a quiet place, a spot she used to visit early in her career to think clearly. The waves below crashed against the rocks, steady and relentless, like her pulse now. Her encrypted notebook sat on the passenger seat beside her, glowing faintly under the moonlight. She flipped it open to the page marked Ghost Line, Level 3, and began updating it. Date, time, flight manifest, personnel encountered. She described the technician's red eyes and the sentence he'd whispered. She sketched the elevator panel. 7 floors, only 3 labeled. She recorded Keanu's demeanor, unusually stiff posture, lack of eye contact, resting his phone face down on the jet tray. Small tells. But the part that hit hardest was her own reaction. The stillness in her hands, the way she hadn't spoken for the entire ride home. She wasn't scared. She was disappointed. Riley had seen many things during her time protecting Keanu. Obsessive fans, stalkers, death threats. She'd stood between him and chaos more times than she could count. But this was different. This wasn't about someone trying to hurt him. It was about him building something that could hurt others, maybe even unknowingly. She turned the page and began listing names, scientists she'd seen visiting. One in particular, Dr. Evelyn Soong, had appeared twice in flight logs but never in security guest passes. Riley flagged it. She knew how to check underground rosters, knew how to track vehicle deliveries that didn't match invoice manifests. That's what she did when threats emerged. She mapped patterns, identified the gaps as from silence. But the gap now was Keanu himself. Why hadn't he told her? Why the sudden boundaries? Why the secrecy around something he once described as a project to give paralyzed veterans hope? Was it still that? Or had it become something darker? She closed the notebook and slipped it back inside its custom case. Then she picked up her phone, hesitated, and opened a secure voice memo app. "If I'm wrong," she whispered, "and this is still about healing, I'll take the heat. I'll apologize. I'll walk away quietly. But if I'm right, if what I saw and what I heard means people are being manipulated into something they never agreed to, then I'll do what I have to, even if it means walking away from the person I've guarded for 12 years. She saved the message under a code only she would recognize. When she drove back toward the city, the lights on the highway blurred through the windshield, but her resolve didn't waver. Something was buried beneath level 3, physically, and she wasn't done asking questions. Not yet. The hotel room was small and anonymous, tucked into a quiet floor of a boutique place Riley had chosen for its lack of attention. The curtains were drawn tight against the Los Angeles morning sun, but light still seeped through at the edges. She hadn't slept. Not really. Just lay in the stiff bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking of every moment that had brought her to this impossible choice. Riley sat at the narrow desk, her black notebook open, the edges worn soft by years of use. She uncapped her pen, hesitated, then began writing the letter she had rehearsed silently for months, but never thought she'd actually write. Her hand trembled at first, but the words poured out. "Keanu," she began, then paused, staring at the name. Just writing it made her chest tighten. How do you say goodbye to someone you've shadowed for over a decade? Someone who trusted you with his life, even when he didn't always say it. "For 12 years, she wrote, "I have stood 3 steps behind and 1 to the side. That's where protection lives, in the quiet margin between harm and trust. And I've never once regretted it. Until now." She stopped to breathe. Her handwriting was steady again. "I believe in you. Not just the public figure, not just the work, I believe in you. The man who flew me home for my mother's funeral without asking for an explanation. The man who volunteers under fake names and cries when no one is watching. That's the man I followed. And that's the man I need to speak to with this letter. Riley reached for the folder beside her. Inside were screenshots of supply lists, transport manifests, technical memos about cognitive elasticity thresholds, and adaptive compliance injection cycles. She had printed them with a secure off-grid laptop. Each page was marked and numbered. Her fingers hovered over the last photograph. It was of a whiteboard deep in the Nevada facility, captured from an angle, barely legible. But one phrase stood out. Subject 6. No reversal. Burn threshold exceeded. That had haunted her since she saw it. She continued the letter. I didn't want to believe what I was seeing. I searched for every alternate explanation. But the more I found, the more certain I became. Something inside the project you're funding has crossed a line. And I believe, I believe you don't see it. Not fully. Maybe you've trusted the wrong people. Maybe you're too deep to look back. She folded the letter once, then she slid it into the envelope she had already labeled with his name. She laid the envelope on the desk for a moment and stared at it, uncertain whether it should contain more. She had seen people lie with charts. She had seen systems bury truth under protocol. But this wasn't about proving something to the world. It was about reaching one man. Next to the envelope, she set a second item, a silver USB drive, encrypted and sealed inside a transparent zip sleeve. Taped to the outside was a handwritten label, "For your eyes only." Inside were transcripts of hallway conversations she'd picked up from directional mics, redacted memos she had decrypted, and a folder titled Timeline Ghostline, which documented the evolution of her suspicions over 3 years. On a separate sheet of paper, she listed the names of individuals she believed were unaware participants, volunteers misled, or subjects poorly informed. Most had signed waivers, but their profiles told a different story. Terminal illnesses, financial desperation, veterans with PTSD who believed they were part of a rehabilitation study. She had highlighted one sentence in her notes. Consent isn't real if it's built on omission. She placed the paper inside the envelope, sealed it with a firm press, and slid it beneath the folded lid of the black notebook, where it had all started. The journal that had tracked everything from her first doubts to her final decision. Every page was backed up, but this physical copy mattered. It held her thoughts the way a screen never could. Riley stood and walked to the mirror on the wall. Her reflection looked unfamiliar. She had let her hair down, tucked into a hood now, and dressed in quiet clothes, the kind that disappeared in a crowd. Her boots were scuffed, her eyes were hollow, but there was no fear, only conviction. She turned back to the desk and double-checked the layout. Letter, USB, journal, envelope. Her eyes lingered for a moment on the USB. She remembered Keanu's voice in a speech once, saying, "Technology is a mirror. It reflects who we are, not what we build." That line had stuck with her. She picked up her phone and deleted everything from it. Then she powered it off and placed it in the nightstand drawer beside the bed. That version of herself, the version that lived to protect and never question, was gone now. She would carry the consequences of this act alone. That was part of what it meant to love someone enough to confront their blind spot. At 6:00 a.m., her flight to Washington, D.C. would board. But first, she had one last stop to make. Keanu's home. Not to see him, just to deliver the truth quietly, like everything else she'd done in his life. The sky over Los Angeles was still dark as Riley quietly closed the door of her hotel room behind her. Her bag was light, packed for utility rather than comfort. The notebook, the letter, and the encrypted drive were all secured inside a slim leather folder she kept pressed to her chest. She hailed a car under an alias. No conversation, No destination given aloud. Just a quietly typed address. Keanu Reeves's private residence. As the car moved through the sleeping city, her thoughts wandered. Not to the facility in Nevada or the scientists in white coats, but to smaller, quieter moments. The night Keanu had flown her across the country to see her dying mother. The time he noticed she hadn't eaten all day and brought her a sandwich, no questions asked. The evening he waited in silence after she returned from a funeral, just sitting with her in the garden while the world moved on around them. He had always respected her boundaries, never pried, never forced a conversation, and now, ironically, she was crossing his. The car stopped at the edge of the long, tree-lined road leading up to his house. Riley stepped out and looked toward the home she had secured more times than she could count. It was still and quiet. There were no cameras pointed at the path she took. She had designed the blind spots herself. She moved with purpose, every step quiet, every movement memorized. The front door was locked, but she had the backup code. She didn't hesitate. Inside, the house felt timeless, minimalist, clean. It smelled faintly of cedarwood and books. She knew the creaks in the floorboards and avoided each one. At the far end of the living room sat the piano, his sanctuary, a place he often retreated to when the world became too loud. Riley walked to it and set the folder gently atop the closed lid. She placed the badge next to it, the same badge she had worn on every flight, every event, every day she stood between him and the unpredictable. Her protection had always been silent. This moment would be too. She whispered to the room, as though he could hear her. "I hope you understand why I had to do this. I protected your life, Keanu. Now I have to protect something bigger, even if it means losing everything." There was no sound but the ticking of a distant wall clock. She walked back to the door, paused and turned around one last time. The folder, the badge, her exit. Everything she had been, reduced to symbols on a piano. Riley opened the door and stepped into the gray new light of early morning. By the time the sun rose, she would be airborne. And by the time Keanu found the letter, she would be gone. The morning air in Washington, D.C. was brisk, touched with the scent of dew, mulch, and distant coffee carts. Riley sat on a weathered bench in Lafayette Square, her hands tucked into her coat, the encrypted drive weighing down her pocket like a brick. Across from her, joggers passed in rhythm. A child chased pigeons near the statue of Jackson, oblivious to the weight of the moment settling into the cracks of the Capitol. She checked her watch again. 9:03 a.m. By 9:05, a woman in a dark gray trench coat appeared at the far end of the path, walking with quiet confidence. Eleanor Shin, investigative journalist, known for toppling billion-dollar cover-ups and escaping smear campaigns with her credibility intact. Riley had spent weeks researching her. No political ties, no scandals, just a single-minded pursuit of truth, and a reputation for not being bought, bullied, or burned. Eleanor approached slowly, scanning the area with a kind of professional calm. She sat without greeting, keeping her body angled slightly away, a practiced move to avoid drawing attention. Her notepad appeared a moment later, discreetly tucked behind a novel she held, like a tourist enjoying the morning. "You Riley Quinn?" Eleanor asked softly, her eyes barely moving from the page. "Yes," Riley said. "And you're Eleanor?" "Depends who's asking." A pause. "Why not the authorities?" Riley didn't look at her. Instead, she followed the path of a cyclist weaving through the trees, their red jacket catching in the sunlight. "Because this isn't just a policy breach. It's bigger. It's not just a legal crisis. It's an ethical fork in the road." Eleanor jotted something, then looked up. "I've heard that before. Usually from whistleblowers who want to feel like heroes." Riley turned to her, eyes steady. "I'm not a hero. I was his bodyguard. I watched his back every hour of every day, until I realized I was protecting something that might be hurting people without ever intending to. Who's he? You'll see. Riley reached into her coat and placed a flash drive between them on the bench, still wrapped in its protective sleeve. Encrypted. You'll need the password. I'll give it to you when I know you're serious. Eleanor didn't pick it up. Why trust me? Because you've gone after people more powerful than him? And because if I'm wrong, you'll find that too? Riley looked back at the pigeons now gathering near the bench. I'm not asking you to believe me. I'm asking you to verify it. Eleanor considered her. What's on here? Screenshots, internal documents, conversations. I made over 3 years. The kind of things people don't talk about when they're building something that could change the world. And your goal? To make sure it's the right kind of change. Eleanor finally picked up the drive and slipped it into her notebook. You'll hear from me. Riley nodded once. I hope I do. Eleanor stood as briskly as she'd arrived, slipping the notebook under her arm. She didn't offer a goodbye, just a sharp nod. Riley watched her disappear down the curved path, her silhouette blending with the morning crowd. As soon as she was gone, Riley felt her spine release. Tension she hadn't realized she'd been carrying eased slightly, but only slightly. She remained on the bench, letting time pass in small, deliberate breaths. What now? Her instincts screamed to move, but she forced herself to stay put for 10 more minutes, a standard rule she followed after exchanging sensitive material. Change locations, blend with foot traffic, don't look back. She pulled on her hood, slung her satchel across her chest, and walked toward the metro entrance, like any other commuter starting their day. Beneath the city streets, as she boarded the red line heading north, Riley's thoughts spiraled. She had trusted Eleanor with everything. Her notes, the intercepted files, the transcripts she'd retyped by hand to avoid digital footprints. Even the conversation she'd overheard between Keanu and the research director, the one that shook her the most. That moment, when she realized some participants may not have known what they were consenting to, had haunted her for months. The line even love can't cross. She clutched the steel pole as the train jolted forward. In her mind, she heard Keanu's voice, calm and certain. No one's being forced. But she had seen their faces. The guarded silence. The technician who muttered under his breath like a man who couldn't sleep anymore. The scientist with trembling hands. And that woman, the one with the clipboard who'd glanced at Riley like she was just another piece of security protocol instead of a human being with eyes and a spine. Riley squeezed her eyes shut for a moment. The hum of the train masked the noise inside her head. She hadn't told Eleanor about the letter she left on Keanu's piano. She wasn't ready to. That was private, personal. She had poured too much of herself into it. 12 years of protection, friendship, admiration, and maybe something deeper she never dared name. But the facts, the patterns, the files that spoke louder than any feeling ever could, those she had shared. She got off 2 stops early just to break her trail, then ducked into a bookstore and ordered tea at the tiny cafe in the back. She found a seat near the window, facing the door, always scanning. As she waited, she checked her second burner phone, the one she kept powered down except for 30-second intervals. No messages, no calls, no signs of being tracked. Still, she knew better than to feel safe. If the encryption failed, if anyone knew what she had just handed over, the clock would already be ticking. She stared into her tea. Eleanor had the drive now, but what she would do with it, how deep she would dig, was something even Riley couldn't predict. 2 hours later, Riley sat in a quiet room above a laundromat in Northeast DC. The blinds were drawn. The windows hadn't been opened since she checked in 3 days ago. She didn't want sunlight. She wanted silence. Control. A place to plan what came next, assuming she still had any control left. She checked her backup laptop. It was encrypted, air-gapped, and untraceable. On it, she had copies of the same files she had given Eleanor. Not because she expected betrayal, but because caution had kept her alive this long. A ping. Her secure email flashed a new message. It was from Eleanor. "I've started digging. You were right to be concerned, not just about the science, but about the silence." That was all. One line, but it told Riley everything she needed to know. It meant Eleanor had already started verifying what Riley had uncovered, probably beginning with open-source trails. Delivery records, staff movements, contract shifts, anonymous patents. Eleanor would work quickly, carefully, relentlessly. That's what Riley was counting on. Still, the weight of it pressed on her chest. She had done the hardest part. She'd handed it over. But now came the waiting, the part she couldn't control, the part that made her wonder if the risk had even been worth it. Would Eleanor find what Riley had found? Would she be able to tell the story before someone tried to bury it? The danger wasn't hypothetical. The project Riley had uncovered, what Keanu had unknowingly allowed to grow under his name, had layers too deep for any one person to expose. Riley had only seen the edge of it. But even that edge had been sharp enough to draw blood. On her desk sat a burner phone she hadn't used yet. It was meant for emergencies only, and for one specific call. Keanu. If Eleanor moved forward with the story, Riley would reach out, one last time. Not to apologize, not even to explain, but to give him a chance to see the truth before the world did. She looked down at her hands, calloused, from training, from service, from 12 years of holding the line for a man she admired. They were shaking. 12 years of loyalty, and she still didn't know how he would respond. Maybe he would hate her. Maybe he would understand. Maybe both. But she knew this. Her duty wasn't to protect his comfort. It was to protect what he stood for, even if that meant walking away from him to do it. Outside the window, a siren wailed in the distance. Riley didn't flinch. She sat still, listening. Somewhere across the city, Eleanor Shin was following the trail. And somewhere across the country, Keanu Reeves still had no idea that the woman who had protected his life for over a decade had just started a countdown that would change both of their lives forever. And once it began, there would be no stopping it. Keanu stepped into his Los Angeles home just after sunset. The house greeted him with silence, but not the peaceful kind. Something was missing. There was no hum from the kettle in the kitchen, no subtle footsteps brushing past in the hallway. Riley's quiet presence had always been a constant, never intrusive, always watchful. Tonight, the air felt hollow without her. He set his travel bag down near the stairs, glancing around. "Riley?" he called out. No response. At first, he wasn't concerned. Maybe she'd stepped out for groceries or was upstairs going over his next travel itinerary. But as he moved from room to room, each one colder and emptier than the last, a quiet sense of unease began to bloom in his chest. He checked the kitchen, the garden-facing sunroom, even the basement. Nothing. Her usual note taped to the fridge or left on the counter was nowhere to be seen. He entered the music room last. It was her favorite room, not because she played anything, but because she liked to sit in the corner during his late-night practice sessions, always pretending not to listen. The grand piano stood where it always did, polished and waiting. And there it was. A white envelope sat centered on the piano's lid. Clean, crisp, deliberate. His name was written across it in her unmistakable block letters. Keanu. Beside it, her security badge, and an encrypted flash drive. He didn't move at first. His hands stayed loose at his sides, but his eyes locked onto the letter like it might detonate. Slowly, he stepped forward and picked it up. The paper felt heavier than it should have. The badge, her badge, the one she'd clipped to every blazer and carried through airports and embassies. It was the last thing he ever expected to see here, discarded like a chapter closed without warning. His breath tightened. He opened the envelope. Inside was a single page, handwritten in her steady, practical script. There was no salutation, just the truth. I didn't want it to be this way, but I wasn't given another door to walk through. She told him she had questions, ethical ones, about a project he was involved in. She had tried to raise concerns discreetly. She had noticed things that didn't sit right, and the deeper she looked, the more she feared that something beautiful was being twisted into something irreversible. I admired you for the way you always protected others, she wrote, even strangers, but there's a line even love and loyalty cannot cross. His throat closed as he continued reading. You taught me to follow my conscience. I finally did. Keanu's hand dropped to his side. The letter trembled slightly in his grip. He looked around again, this time not in confusion, but in the aching stillness of realization. Riley was gone, and she hadn't just left him a message. She'd left a warning. Keanu set the letter down on the piano lid and picked up the encrypted flash drive. He turned it over in his fingers, recognizing the model. Military grade. Something Riley would have only used if she believed the contents were too sensitive for cloud transfer or casual viewing. He didn't try to open it. Not yet. Not tonight. Instead, he sat down slowly on the piano bench, letting the quiet settle around him. The room, once filled with melody and memory, now felt stripped of its warmth. A shell. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out. Tyler. Hey, boss. Riley missed her security check-in. Want me to look into it? He stared at the screen for a long moment before typing, No. I found her note. I'll handle it. But even as he pressed send, he felt the hollowness behind those words. Handle what? He wasn't even sure what this was. He tried calling her. Straight to voicemail. He tried again. Still nothing. His mind began flipping through the last few weeks, replaying interactions like security footage. Riley had been quieter, yes, but not absent. Reserved, but never neglectful. Always punctual, always watching. Except now, she had left everything behind with no return date and no explanation beyond that letter. He scrolled to his recent messages and called May, Riley's second in command. She picked up immediately. Keanu, what's wrong? Do you know where Riley is? There was a pause. No, I haven't heard from her since last Friday. I assumed she was traveling with you. She's not. And she didn't tell you anything? No change in schedule? No, May said, voice tightening. Is she okay? I don't know, he replied. And he didn't. After he hung up, he opened his laptop and inserted the drive. A secure folder appeared, locked with 2 layers of encryption. He recognized Riley's old military login sequence. It would take time to crack, or he could just wait. If she wanted him to see it, she'd left instructions somewhere. She was never careless. Instead, he returned to the letter. He reread the last lines, hoping there was something he had missed the first time. But the message was clear. She had discovered something. Something he was connected to. Something she believed he wasn't seeing clearly. And that belief had shattered everything between them. You taught me to follow my conscience, the line echoed again. I finally did. Keanu stood and paced the room. Every instinct told him to find her, to talk it through, to explain. But explain what? He didn't even know what she'd uncovered. The research facility? The Veterans Project? It had all seemed transparent, noble even. And yet, Riley never ran without cause. He glanced at the piano once more, at the badge, the letter, the silence. Something was wrong. Not just with Riley, with everything. Keanu walked through the house as if seeing it for the first time. Every corner reminded him of Riley. The glass by the front door she always tapped twice before stepping out. the worn leather folder near the bookshelf where she kept emergency protocols and her notes, the half-empty bottle of green tea on the kitchen counter, still cold. She had left it all behind. Cleanly, quietly. That wasn't like her. Riley didn't believe in exits without debriefs. He opened the hall closet where she kept her backup gear. Empty. She'd even taken the old first aid kit she insisted on carrying during international trips. No clothes, no duffel, no notes for May, not even a schedule for Tyler. She'd wiped her tracks like someone going underground. He returned to the living room and sat down on the couch. For a long time, he didn't move. The city outside was beginning to wake. A garbage truck hissed 2 streets over. A bird sang just outside the window. Life continued, indifferent to the silence Riley had left behind. Then he opened his journal. It was something few people knew about. His private habit, never digital, never dictated. Just pen on paper, thoughts without a filter. He found the latest entry, dated 2 weeks ago. A scribbled line in the corner made his throat tighten. Riley's quieter. Watching, more than guarding, something shifting. He had sensed it. He just hadn't done anything about it. Now it was too late. He reached for his phone again and typed her name into his contacts. It still read, Riley Monroe, Shield. No last-minute nickname. No emojis. Just what she'd been to him for 12 years. He hit the call button one more time, straight to voicemail. Riley, I don't know what's happening yet, but I read your letter. If you think I've gone blind to something, I need to know what it is. Please, I trusted you for a reason. Just talk to me. He ended the call and leaned back, eyes closed. He didn't cry, not yet, but there was a hollowness forming behind his ribs, a pressure that would only grow. Finally, he returned to the piano. The envelope was still there, creased now from his fingers, the flash drive beside it. He stared at them for a long time before he gently closed the lid and walked away. Not out of denial, not because he didn't want to know, but because Riley had trusted him with this moment. Her silence meant something. She wasn't trying to destroy him. She was trying to wake him. Whatever she'd seen, whatever she feared, he would face it. Not as a star, not as a public figure, as a man who had once inspired trust in the most loyal person he'd ever known. And maybe, just maybe, he could still earn it back. Keanu stepped into the Ghost Line administrative wing with a gravity that silenced the room. His eyes swept across the polished floors, past the glass-enclosed labs where technicians in white coats moved like ghosts. He didn't speak. His presence alone did all the talking. Dr. Ayers, the director of Ghost Line operations, emerged from his office and approached carefully, already sensing this wasn't going to be a routine visit. I need the truth, Keanu said without a greeting. No PR version, no protective layers. Everything. Now, Dr. Ayers hesitated. Keanu, we've been transparent. You haven't, Keanu interrupted. And don't pretend Riley didn't ask questions before she left. She was always quiet, but she saw everything. A flicker of discomfort passed over Ayers' face. He motioned toward the conference room. Let's talk in private. Inside, the lead neuroscientist, Dr. Yelena Moreau, and 2 attorneys from the compliance team were already waiting. Keanu didn't sit. He placed Riley's letter on the table in front of them. I know about Subject 4. I know about Level 3. I've been told people didn't fully understand what they were volunteering for, so again, Dr. Moreau leaned forward slowly. Subject 4 is a combat veteran, name classified, but yes, he was paralyzed from the waist down. He entered the program voluntarily. After 2 years of therapy brought no improvement. His neural interface was implanted 7 months ago. Voluntarily, Keanu repeated. Was he told everything? The consent forms were thorough, the legal rep chimed in, and signed under medical supervision. Keanu turned toward Moreau. But was he told that the tech might change how he thinks? That he might start feeling different in ways no one can predict? Moreau hesitated. We explained cognitive side effects were possible: mild anxiety, neural adaptation, temporary dream disturbances. But what we're seeing with him now isn't harmful. It's transformation. Keanu? He's walking. At that moment, Ayers pressed a button on a nearby console. A video feed activated, displaying a sterile rehab room. In it, a lean man with close-cropped hair stood between two support bars. He was wobbling, gripping tightly but upright. Ayers stood nearby, ready to intervene. The man took 3 shaky steps forward, then paused. A tremor passed through his hands. Keanu leaned in, watching every detail. Is that fear? It's fatigue, Moreau replied. Or perhaps emotional overwhelm. He hasn't stood in 4 years. You'd be shaking too. But Keanu didn't look away from the man's face. Something lingered there, behind the eyes. Not just effort, not just pain, confusion. As if the mind wasn't entirely synced with the body it had suddenly been reunited with. The steps were real, yes, but so was the disconnect. And Keanu felt it deep in his gut. Keanu folded his arms as the video looped again. "Turn it off," he said quietly. Dr. Ayers complied, the screen fading to black. A silence fell across the room. The lawyers exchanged uneasy glances. "Dr. Moreau, you're seeing a man reclaim agency over his own body. That's the core of Ghostline's mission. We're not building weapons, Keanu. We're restoring people." "But at what cost?" Keanu asked. "Riley didn't run because of what you claimed to be doing. She ran because of what she saw happening underneath it." "She misunderstood," Ayers said. "She didn't have the scientific background to grasp the nuance." "She had instincts," Keanu cut in. "And for 12 years, those instincts kept me alive. If she flinched, it meant something." Moreau looked down at her notes. "You're not wrong to be concerned. Subject 4 has shown inconsistencies. He's recovered partial motor function, yes, but he's also experienced cognitive irregularities, phantom commands, speech hesitation, dream episodes he doesn't recognize as his." Keanu's voice dropped. "So, why continue?" "Because he begged us not to stop," Moreau replied. "He said he'd rather live with side effects than in that chair again, and we've documented every change. This isn't clandestine. We're trying to learn as fast as we can." One of the lawyers interjected, "And we've kept everything compliant, within military parameters. These are DARPA-approved pathways." "That's not what Riley saw," Keanu replied. "She saw the gray space, the parts you're not putting in the files." Moreau nodded slowly. "We've asked ourselves hard questions, Keanu. About memory imprinting, about the depth of neural rewriting. And yes, there are things we don't fully understand. But if we wait for perfect knowledge, people like Subject 4 never get a chance." Keanu stepped away from the table, walking toward the wall of windows. The Nevada sky outside was cloudless, impossibly blue. He pressed a hand to the glass, his mind spiraling through memories of wounded veterans he'd met at VA hospitals, of fundraisers where hope hung by a thread. He wanted to believe in this, but belief required more than science. He turned back to them. "I want everything," he said. "Every transcript, every side report, every flagged incident. No redactions, no summaries. And if there's anything in your logs that even hints at coercion or unapproved procedures, I want it brought to me within 24 hours. Dr. Ayers nodded reluctantly. "You'll have it. And one more thing," Keanu added. "No one walks back into that Level 3 lab until I walk in with them." Moreau hesitated. "That could delay recovery for Subject 4 and others." Keanu's jaw clenched. "Then delay it, Because if Riley's right, we're not just saving lives, we might be reshaping what it means to be human. And that deserves every second of caution we can give. Keanu sat with that for a moment. The words weighed heavier than he expected. And the others? Subjects 1 through 3? Dr. Ayers hesitated. 2 withdrew. 1 had adverse reactions. Subject 1 passed away. Stroke, we think. Possibly related, possibly not. And Riley knew all this? She knew parts, Moreau said. But she didn't know Subject 4. She never saw the games, only the shadows. Keanu stood. He walked to the far window, staring at the dry Nevada horizon. You say you're helping people walk again, but if even one of them didn't truly know what they were signing up for, it's not medicine, it's coercion. No one replied. Keanu turned, his voice steadier now. I want a full audit, top to bottom. I want every file declassified and reviewed. I want informed consent made real, not legal camouflage. And until then, the trials stop. All of them. Moreau opened her mouth to object, but closed it again when she saw his face. I came here to find the truth, Keanu said. But the truth isn't in your data. It's in their eyes. And when he thought of Subject 4's eyes, trembling with something deeper than movement, he knew Riley hadn't left for nothing. Keanu didn't sleep that night, not a minute. Back in his home in the hills above Los Angeles, the lights remained off. The city below shimmered, indifferent. A soft breeze pressed through the open balcony doors, but even that couldn't clear the weight pressing against his chest. On the coffee table in front of him were 4 documents. The newly unsealed files from Ghostline marked internal observation logs. Hand-delivered, no digital copies, no press statements, just cold, hard text, and the quiet hum of implication. He stared at them for hours, before finally opening the one with Riley's initials scrawled in the margins. It was a patient report, Subject 2, a young man from Colorado, formerly a paratrooper, who had suffered a traumatic brain injury during a training accident. He entered the Ghostline program with high hopes, but the logs painted a different story. Persistent auditory hallucinations, repetitive movement behaviors, reports of losing time. No disciplinary actions, no removal from the trial, just observation, followed by withdrawal, followed by silence. Keanu leaned back and rubbed his eyes. He opened the next file, Subject 1, the one they said had died. It was only 6 pages long. No family contact, no emergency override logs, no ethical review request. Just, status terminated. Outcome, fatal cerebral hemorrhage, neurological swelling observed post-Jeter fusion. It didn't read like a death. It read like an error note. His breath caught. He closed the file. Ghostline Putz had shown him Subject 4, the walking miracle. But the ones they didn't show were screaming louder now. In clinical codes, in missing signatures, in things Riley must have pieced together night after night. Alone. The final file was different. It wasn't about a subject. It was about him. Note from internal consensus to Ghostline admin. Reeves has not rescinded public support. Continue marketing materials cautiously. Do not disclose adverse outcomes without directive. Reeves. Minimize. Narrative softly if needed. Keanu stared at that sentence for a long time, longer than anything else. Discredit her? That was their plan? He pushed the papers away, stood up, walked to the window. The dilemma was no longer about the tech. It was about who he became if he stayed quiet. The morning came with a pale gray sky and the distant thrum of traffic below. Keanu brewed a pot of coffee he wouldn't drink. His phone buzzed on the counter. 5 missed calls from Ghostline's legal team. He didn't answer. Instead, he sat at the table, opened Riley's letter again, and read it slowly. word by word, like he hadn't already memorized every line. You once told me that doing the right thing means doing it even when no one sees. I believed that, still do. But now I wonder, do you? Her words weren't a betrayal, they were a plea for him to wake up, to see beyond the glossy mission statements and carefully staged demos, to realize that real harm could hide inside good intentions. He opened his laptop and pulled up his contract with Ghostline, a thick document buried in legalese, layered with non-disclosure clauses, intellectual property claims, and endorsement parameters. He searched for keywords: liability, mortality, cognitive harm, psychological trials. What he found chilled him. There was no oversight board, no ethics review panel beyond an internal body chosen by Ghostline itself. All trial subjects were covered under DARPA's Emerging Tech Acceleration Waiver, a loophole meant to speed innovation, and one that meant accountability moved slower than progress. He picked up the phone and dialed Dr. Yelena Moreau. She answered on the second ring, her voice tired. "Mr. Reeves?" "No more spin," he said. "Tell me honestly, did Riley ever try to stop the program?" There was a pause. She asked for a pause. For a month to evaluate long-term cognitive impact, we denied the request. Why? Because she wasn't on the science team. And we had pressure. The Pentagon wanted results, the media wanted stories, and she scared people. That last part hit hard. See, scared them. She wasn't wrong. But she asked the questions no one wanted to answer, made them uncomfortable. Keanu closed his eyes. That's not fear. That's conscience. She told me, Moreau said softly, that if you ever read the files, you'd feel what she felt. I think she knew this would come. Keanu hung up. He knew what came next. He had to confront the machine he'd helped build, with the truth Riley never stopped protecting. That afternoon, Keanu arrived unannounced at the downtown office of Ghostline's founding board member, a man named Curtis Vale. Former intelligence, deep ties to defense, a master of speaking carefully while saying nothing. But Keanu wasn't here for niceties. Curtis looked surprised when the actor walked past his assistant and into the office uninvited. "Keanu," he said, standing slowly. "Didn't expect—" "I read the files." Curtis froze, then motioned toward a chair. "You want to sit?" "No." Keanu stayed standing. "I want to know why you never told me the whole story." Curtis walked to the bar cart near the window and poured himself a glass of water. "You were the face, not the framework. You believed in helping veterans. We needed someone who could open doors and hearts." "That's not an answer," Keanu said. "That's—" Curtis sighed. "Look, you want truth? Ghostline is walking a legal and moral tightrope, but breakthroughs don't come from waiting. They come from daring. That's always been the deal." Keanu stepped forward, voice steady. The deal was to help people, not to gamble with their minds. You've got subjects in mental spirals, one dead, one seeing things that never happened, and you call it daring? Curtis didn't flinch. Every innovation comes with casualties. Soldiers die in training exercises. Test pilots crash. You know that. I'm not talking about war. I'm talking about men and women who signed up for healing and got rewritten instead. Curtis drank the water slowly, then set it down. What exactly do you want, Keanu? A statement? An apology? You'll drag your name through the mud too, you realize that. I want accountability, Keanu said. Full stop. Not buried summaries, not legal gymnastics. I want the people we helped to know the truth. I want Riley's name cleared, and I want Ghostline to stop hiding behind heroes. Curtis looked at him for a long time. If you do this, there's no walking it back. I'm not walking anything back, Keanu replied. I'm walking forward. Finally. As he left the office, stepping back into the noise of the city, A weight lifted slightly from his chest. Riley had walked away so he could finally see the road ahead. Now he would take it. It began with a single notification. Keanu's phone lit up at 6:14 a.m. with a quiet buzz. One of his team members had sent a message with a link and a simple line, "It's out." He didn't need to ask what it was. He already knew. He tapped the link and the screen filled with the black and white banner of the Washington Post. The headline hit like a slow punch to the chest. Exclusive. Inside Project Ghostline. Where Hope Meets the Edge of Ethics, by Eleanor Shin. He took a breath and started reading. The article was long, nearly 4,000 words, but Eleanor's style was clear and sharp. The tone wasn't explosive or sensational, it was deliberate, surgical. Every paragraph grounded in evidence Riley had provided, screenshots of internal logs, first-hand testimonies from anonymous subjects, fragments of Riley's journal carefully quoted and cross-referenced. The piece opened with an image of a military veteran seated in a wheelchair beside an empty examination chair. The caption read, "Not everyone walks away." Keanu felt his chest tighten. Eleanor never named him, but he was present in every line. Described as a public advocate for the program, a well-intentioned supporter, a benefactor who perhaps didn't see the full picture. She quoted one unnamed source from inside Ghostline. "The actor meant well, but we were told to show him only what the board approved. There were layers beneath what he saw." She included Riley's own words, taken directly from her encrypted journal. "They say the ends justify the means, but I've seen the means, and I wouldn't wish them on anyone." Each section of the article focused on a different thread. One explored the waiver system used to bypass traditional clinical ethics. Another broke down the neurological side effects subjects reported: hallucinations, memory distortion, emotional dysregulation, and how those symptoms were often marked as within tolerable range. Riley's timeline was detailed. Her observations, her concerns, her final warning to Keanu all laid bare in stark prose. Eleanor had done her homework. The piece was airtight. By the end of the article, Keanu was still staring at the screen, unmoving. He didn't feel betrayed. He felt seen. He scrolled to the very end, where Eleanor included a single quote from Riley's letter, not one meant to indict, but one meant to explain. "Because they belong to you and something beautiful, I just couldn't let that belief be used to hurt people." Keanu whispered the words aloud. She wasn't trying to hurt me. She was trying to protect everyone. He looked out the window as sunlight began pushing through the clouds. This wasn't an ending. It was the beginning of something he couldn't ignore. By mid-morning, Ghostline Truth was trending across every major platform. Social media was ablaze, not with outrage alone, but with questions, pointed, urgent, relentless. Is this how we treat veterans? How many trials go undocumented like this? Why did it take a bodyguard to blow the whistle? News outlets scrambled to respond. Cable panels lit up with ethicists, neuroscientists, former military officers, and political analysts debating the implications. Was this a scientific overreach? A military gray zone? A failure of celebrity influence? Keanu's name wasn't in the headline, but it was in every discussion. He was the recognizable face of the project, whether he liked it or not. Inside his kitchen, Keanu sat at the table with his publicist, Alan, who had rushed over after the story broke. Alan was pale, pacing in tight circles, trying to spin. "We could release a statement clarifying your intentions. Say you were misled. Say you're shocked. We can shape the narrative before it gets away from us." But Keanu just shook his head. No spin. No saving face. If the truth's out, we need to let it stand. Alan blinked. "You don't want to protect your reputation? Want to protect what matters." Riley told the truth. "I'm not going to erase that to make people more comfortable with me." The silence that followed was heavier than any crisis plan. Outside, cameras were beginning to gather at the edge of his gated property. Helicopters thudded softly overhead. But Keanu didn't flinch. He wasn't afraid of the exposure. Not now. He walked into his study and pulled the file folder containing the physical copy of Riley's letter. He opened it again and reread the final paragraph. "You once said fame was like wind. It can carry a message or scatter it into dust. This is me choosing to carry it." He had chosen her path, knowing what it would cost her. And now he would choose his. On his desk sat a folder Ghostline had sent weeks ago containing talking points, press materials, and scheduled interviews for an upcoming campaign. He picked it up and dropped it into the shredder without a second thought. Outside, reporters shouted his name. He didn't answer. He wasn't ready to speak yet. He was ready to listen. Because sometimes, the loudest voice is the one that left quietly. Keanu arrived in Washington, D.C. just after noon. No entourage, no security. Just a duffel bag slung over his shoulder and a pair of sunglasses that couldn't hide the wear in his expression. He didn't check into a hotel. He didn't inform his agent or his team. The only person he reached out to was Eleanor Shin. He picked up on the second ring. "I need to see her," he said. There was a pause on the line. "She didn't ask me to act as a bridge. I'm not asking you to convince her. Just to tell her I'm here. That I'm asking, not as a public figure, as someone who trusted her and maybe failed to protect what she was trying to save." Eleanor sighed. "You're 2 days late, you know. The media's circling. She could vanish any minute." "I know, but I have to try." A few hours later, Keanu sat alone on a wooden bench in Dumbarton Oaks Park, tucked away in the corner near a trail where magnolia leaves scattered across the path. The sun was beginning to dip. The world moved quietly around him. A jogger passed by. A dog barked in the distance, but he stayed still. Then, footsteps behind him. He didn't turn right away. "I didn't think you'd come," he said softly. Riley Ward stepped into view, dressed in black jeans and a slate-gray jacket, her hair tied back. She looked thinner than before. Her eyes were sharp, but tired. "I almost didn't," she replied. "I figured if you really needed answers, you already had them." Keanu stood but didn't step forward. "I have information, not answers, not the kind that matter." She looked at him, then asked, "I didn't come to interrogate you. I came to understand." He paused. "Not as your employer, as someone who sat across from you every day for 12 years, someone who always knew you'd take a bullet for me. I just never knew you'd walk away instead." Riley's face didn't flinch, but her jaw tightened. "It wasn't easy." "I know," he said. They stood there, two people shaped by silence, trying to find a way back through it. They sat down on the bench, a few feet of space between them like a buffer for the words neither had fully rehearsed. Riley kept her hands folded in her lap, her gaze fixed on the gravel path ahead. Keanu spoke first. "You could have told me. You knew I would have listened." "I tried," she said, voice low. "Not directly, but I tried. You were so committed to the mission, so sure it was helping people. I didn't want to be the person who pulled the rug out from under that. But you left instead." "I had to," she said. "You were too close, and I was starting to feel like I was guarding something that wasn't clean. I didn't want to be complicit just because I was loyal." Keanu nodded slowly. "You didn't just walk away from the job. You walked away from us, from everything we built." Riley turned her eyes toward him. "And you think that didn't break something in me too?" He looked down. "I kept hoping I was wrong," she continued, "that maybe it was just growing pains in the research, that the side effects were manageable, that the consent forms were real. But the more I looked, the more I saw corners cut, voices silenced, people used." "You were right," Keanu said. "I've read the logs, talked to the scientists, and when I looked in Subject 4's eyes, I saw what you saw." Riley closed her eyes briefly, as if she had been holding her breath for months. "Then why didn't you speak out?" "I was trying to fix it from the inside, quietly. Thought if I acted too fast, I'd destroy the good we were still doing. But silence always protects the wrong side longer than the right side can wait, she said. He didn't argue. You were never the enemy, Riley. You were trying to protect people, including me. I was. But I also stopped trusting you, and once that broke, I didn't know how to come back. There was a long pause, not hostile, just fragile. You know what hurt the most? Keanu finally asked. Not the article, not the exposure. What hurt was knowing you carried that alone for so long, and I didn't notice. You were never supposed to notice, she whispered. That's the job of a bodyguard. Keanu looked at her with a softness that wasn't pity. It was respect, maybe even forgiveness. But neither said the word. 3 days after the meeting in the park, Keanu stood behind a podium in a quiet press room in Los Angeles. There were no dramatic lights, no choreographed entrance, just a wooden lectern, a few reporters, and a carefully worded statement in his hands. He didn't read from it. He folded the paper and spoke from memory. I want to start by saying something I should have said sooner. When people are hurting, when science moves faster than understanding, when power is left unchecked, silence is not neutral. It becomes part of the harm. He paused. For over 2 years, I supported a project called Ghost Line. I believed in its mission, to help veterans recover what war had taken from them. I still believe in that hope. But I no longer believe the path we took honored that hope with enough caution or enough truth. Murmurs rippled across the room. Cameras clicked. A few reporters lowered their pens, sensing something real unfolding. Effective immediately, Keanu continued. I've instructed all financial contributions to Ghost Line to be suspended. I've also requested that the board initiate an independent ethics review, led not by military insiders or company affiliates, but by a civilian panel of neuroscientists, ethicists, and human rights advocates. He looked up. And until that review is complete, I am calling for a full pause on all neural interface trials under the Ghost Line umbrella. No more subjects, no more expansions, not until we understand every consequence. Someone raised a hand, but he shook his head gently. This isn't a debate. This is accountability. Later that afternoon, his official statement was released to the press in writing, but what trended online wasn't the text. It was the clip of him saying simply, "We owe people more than hope. We owe them honesty." By the end of the day, several members of Congress had taken notice. Senator Avery Wells introduced a bill proposing stricter federal oversight of neural interface technologies, citing the Ghost Line revelations. Keanu's name appeared in the opening remarks. He released a video in support, stating, "If we don't protect the vulnerable now, we'll look back one day and wonder how we let this happen under the flag of progress." In a small apartment on the outskirts of Washington, D.C., Riley watched the press conference replay on a cracked tablet screen. The sound quality wavered, but the words were unmistakable. She sat on the edge of the bed, elbows on her knees, eyes locked on the man speaking from the podium. He didn't look like a celebrity. He looked like someone who had just stepped out of a long storm. Still standing. Still changed. When he said, "We owe people more than hope. We owe them honesty," she closed her eyes and exhaled, steady for the first time in weeks. Her phone buzzed, but she didn't answer it. She wasn't ready to be found, not yet. There was no job waiting for her, no offers. Her name was radioactive in the world of private security. Half the headlines called her a whistleblower, the other half said traitor. She wasn't interested in clarifying it for them. She'd done what she had to do, and for the first time, it felt like maybe, just maybe, that was enough. Later that week, Ghost Line's interim board issued a statement confirming the halt in funding and participation in the independent review. The language was cautious, but the message was clear. They were no longer in control of the narrative. Multiple subjects from the Ghost Line trials came forward, not just Subject 4, others. A woman from Michigan who had suffered night terrors, a former Navy corpsman who claimed he couldn't remember 3 entire days. Their stories flooded news programs and comment sections, and behind each one was Riley's invisible footprint. The evidence she had collected, the names she had preserved, the truth she had refused to bury. Keanu stayed out of the spotlight after the initial statement. No interviews, no late-night talk shows, just quiet support. He was seen visiting clinics, attending a closed-door policy session in D.C. about brain Germany ethics. He never spoke about Riley by name, but his actions echoed everything she had stood for. One reporter asked him if he regretted supporting Ghost Line. His answer was simple: "I regret trusting people who didn't deserve it, but I'll never regret trusting Riley Ward." The clip went viral in under an hour. Riley watched that one too, and this time, she didn't cry. She smiled, because something bigger than both of them had begun. The follow-up article came out quietly. No front-page placement, no breaking news banners, just a new headline beneath the byline of Eleanor Shin, published in the Sunday opinion section of the Washington Post. 12 years and a letter, what loyalty looks like in silence. The article began not with science or politics, but with memory. Eleanor wrote about the unspoken history between Keanu Reeves and Riley Ward. She described how most people never noticed Riley, how she faded into the background, always just out of frame, and how that invisibility had been her greatest strength, until the day she chose to step into the light. The article didn't aim to stir up more controversy. It was a reflection, a portrait of loyalty under pressure, of conscience pressed to its limit. Eleanor included a brief timeline of Riley's 12 years with Keanu. A few quiet anecdotes, never before shared, surfaced. The time Riley stood between Keanu and a deranged fan during a meet and greet. The night she drove him through a snowstorm after his flight was grounded, without sleep, without question. The morning she stood at the foot of his mother's grave because he had no one else to bring. And then came the letter. Eleanor didn't print it in full, just a line near the end of the article. "There's a line even love and loyalty cannot cross." That was Riley's voice, sharp, precise, human. Eleanor wrote that Riley had not sought fame, had not asked for reward. She had simply acted, because something inside her refused to remain quiet when people were being harmed, even if no one else could see it happening. The final paragraph read, "Sometimes the people who protect us have to protect us from ourselves. That's not betrayal. That's the highest form of loyalty." The article spread more slowly than the first, but its impact lingered. Readers didn't repost it for scandal. They reposted it for the quiet heartbreak behind every sentence, for the reminder that the strongest people aren't always the loudest, and that love doesn't always look like agreement. It looks like intervention. That same morning, Keanu was not online. He wasn't home. He was in a long-term rehab center just outside San Diego, sitting across from a man in a wheelchair who hadn't slept through the night in months. Subject 4. His name was Lance. Lance looked thinner than Keanu remembered, paler. There were bruises along his arms from recent IVs, and his hands twitched slightly every few seconds, like his nerves were still trying to find a rhythm. He recognized Keanu immediately, but didn't smile. Instead, he gave a small nod and said, "Didn't think you'd actually show." Keanu sat across from him. "I had to." Lance looked down at the cup of water in his hand. He wasn't drinking it, just holding it like an anchor. "You were part of the reason I signed up. They showed us videos of you talking about the program, said you were behind it, said it was safe." "I thought it was," Keanu said. Lance raised his eyes. "And now?" "Now I know better." Lance nodded slowly, as if that confirmed something he'd been holding in. "Dane said I'd walk again," Lance said. "And I did. Sort of. I stood, I took steps, but sometimes when I sleep, I see memories that aren't mine. I wake up crying over things I don't remember living through. I can't tell if I'm becoming myself again or if I'm becoming someone else." Keanu didn't interrupt. "I'm not angry," Lance added. "Not exactly, just lost. I wanted hope, and they gave it to me, but they didn't tell me there might be a price." "I'm sorry, Lance," Keanu said. "You deserved the truth from the beginning." Lance stared at him for a long moment. "Did you know someone blew the whistle on them?" "Yes." "Hear you, friend?" "She was more than that," Keanu said. "She was the reason I survived things I didn't even see coming, and she walked away so I'd finally open my eyes." Lance gave a faint smile. "Then maybe it worked." Keanu leaned forward. "If I could go back, if I could make sure the consent was real, the side effects known, the process slower, I would." "I know," Lance said, "but we're here now." Keanu nodded. Before he left, Lance reached into his bedside drawer and pulled out a folded note. "She sent this. I think she meant it for you." Keanu unfolded the paper, his hands shaking slightly. It was just one sentence written in Riley's handwriting. "Even when the world lies to you, your heart still knows how to tell the truth." Keanu folded the note carefully, like something sacred. He didn't say anything more. He didn't need to. The journal lay open on Keanu's desk, its pages slightly curled from years of use. He stared at the blank space, pen in hand, unsure where to begin. He finally wrote, "I thought I was building a bridge to hope. I never asked what it crossed over." He paused, reread the line, then slowly exhaled. For the first time in weeks, the silence didn't feel empty, it felt earned. He continued writing, "The truth is, I didn't want to believe something was wrong. I thought believing in a cause meant standing by it, even when it got complicated. But I've learned the hard way that hope without accountability becomes something else. It becomes blindness. And no one should ever suffer in the shadows of someone else's good intentions." He set the pen down, letting the words speak for themselves. He had thought of Riley every day since she left. He still did. Her absence lingered, not like a wound, but like a question. One that forced him to keep asking himself who he really was when no one was watching. He thought of all the times she had stepped between him and danger, sometimes with a look, sometimes with a hand. And then, finally, with the truth. She had taken the hardest path, walking away from everything she had built, from the man she had protected for over a decade, not because she stopped caring, but because she cared too much to stay silent. He looked out the window. The sun was low now, casting long gold streaks across the floor. Outside, the world moved on. Reporters filed new stories. The public formed opinions. But what mattered most wasn't the headlines. It was what happened next. Keanu didn't want to become a symbol. He didn't want sympathy or praise. What he wanted was clarity and change. He reached for his phone and opened the browser. The article was still there. Eleanor's follow-up piece. He read the closing paragraph again. "Sometimes the people who protect us have to protect us from ourselves. That's not betrayal. That's the highest form of loyalty." He closed the screen and folded his hands in his lap. The words rang louder than anything else, because they weren't just about Riley. They were about every person who had the courage to step forward when everyone else stepped back. He had met Lance. He had looked into the eyes of the man they called Subject 4, and he had seen both sides of the story, the gratitude and the fear, the possibility and the price. Ghostline had helped some, that was undeniable, but it had hurt others, and that couldn't be ignored anymore. The goal wasn't to abandon science, it was to anchor it in humanity. Keanu stood from the desk and walked to the back patio, where the sky had turned a soft blue. He thought of the veterans still in treatment, the families still waiting for answers, and the scientists who had begun to question their own methods. Change would take time. Real accountability always did. But it had started. He reached for his journal again. This time, he didn't write in silence. He read aloud. I trusted people who were chasing something powerful. I wanted to believe in healing. But I forgot that healing without truth is just control in disguise. He paused. Riley didn't betray me. She reminded me of who I said I wanted to be. And she did it knowing it might cost her everything. He thought about that cost. Her reputation, her career, the years of loyalty no one would ever see. And then he whispered, as if she could hear him wherever she was, "Thank you for not letting me stay blind." He set the journal down and sat quietly for a moment. Then his voice broke the quiet once more. Have you ever had to walk away from someone you admired just to do the right thing? Maybe it wasn't easy. Maybe it hurt more than staying. But something inside told you it was time. Time to draw a line. Time to speak up. Time to become the voice you'd been waiting to hear. It's a rare kind of strength, the kind that doesn't scream or demand credit. The kind that walks away not in anger, but in integrity. That's what Riley Ward did. She didn't expose secrets to destroy. She exposed them to protect. And maybe there's someone in your life who's done the same. Or maybe it was you. Maybe you've been the one who had to step into the storm and face the fallout. If so, you're not alone. Because doing the right thing doesn't always feel good. It feels heavy, lonely, even wrong at first. But when the dust settles, it's the only weight worth carrying. So we ask you now, have you ever made a painful decision for the greater good? Something that changed you? Something you still carry? You share your story in the comments. There's someone out there who might need to hear it. And if this journey has moved you, if Keanu's reckoning, Riley's sacrifice, and the cost of truth have left you thinking, then subscribe. Join us for the next chapter. Because the story doesn't end here. The next step might be even harder, but the next step always matters.